Nice to see you.
To see you too. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for being interested in this.
Oh, no worries. So, as someone who's been an anti-poverty activist for over 40 years, what inspired you to start this journey and what challenges have you faced during your career?
I don't know if I can say this to students, but what inspired me, I guess, was pissed offness at poverty, right? How bad it is, how
Mhm.
it hurts people, how it's completely unnecessary, and how it could be ended with just a little redistribution of wealth. Like it gives the billionaires more control over the political system, which then goes on to create more poverty.
Yeah, totally. What would you say was your proudest achievement during your career and your lifetime?
I often say that I have a callus on my forehead from banging it against a brick wall. I've worked on, had little victories like getting, working with people to get the Carnegie Center open, working with people to get SRO vacancy control in the single room occupancy hotels, getting funding for some school lunch programs back in the 90s. But those aren't, the systemic things that we need. When we've gone after things like ending homelessness, raising welfare rates a lot, we haven't really had much success. So it's a matter of just keeping plodding on. I guess my late partner always just said onward.
So, what do you think was the biggest challenge for you during your career?
Well, okay, so in the early 2000s, I started volunteering at the Carnegie Project, and we did, I think, 9 or 10 annual reports about rent increases in the single room occupancy hotels and how they were going up and being gentrified and pushing poor people out and creating homelessness. And every time we did a report, we'd meet with politicians about it. We'd have news conferences and we'd say, oh, we need a law that will stop these rent increases. But it didn't happen until I got on council and I managed to get a motion through that the city would bring in rent control in the SROs. And then the city did it, and then the landlords took them to court and won, and the city appealed it and lost, and the province brought it in. So we got it. It's in effect now, but now the landlords are challenging it again. So it's a constant battle. I had a daughter my daughter, Laura, was born with a hole in her heart. And we came from the States a week before she was born, actually. Because she was born here, she got really good care. And I was able to thank Tommy Douglas for having what we called in the States in those days socialized medicine. I was able to thank him for saving our lives. But now the medical system that we have is under attack. So you have to constantly keep fighting. But then there's other things like we were involved in this local area planning process in the downtown east side. And this was 10 years ago, and we thought we had lost everything, and we were all wanting to quit and make a big show of how horrible we thought the process was and how terrible we thought the city was. And now looking back 10 years later, we got the only no condo zone in the downtown east side. We got the only area in the downtown east side where if you want to build a rental housing tower, you have to put in social housing. So it's hard to tell whether you've won or lost, and it's always a constant battle.
Do you think that homelessness should be treated as a public health issue or more of a housing issue or something else? What do you think?
It's an interesting idea to treat it as a public health issue. I've always mostly thought of it as a housing issue, right? Like, for example, in Vancouver, there's about 4,000 homeless people. And then we've got 6,000 people in the SROs, which are just single rooms with washroom down the hall, no cooking facilities. And all the SROs are in earthquake-prone buildings. So the first earthquake that comes along could be a disaster. So there's 10,000 units of housing that we need in Vancouver. and somebody has to pay for them. They cost $500,000 each to build a housing unit. So we actually need housing to put people in. In that sense, it's a housing issue. Of course, it's a health issue because people who are homeless have about half the life expectancy as people who are housed in BC, and that's because they're homeless, right? It's really hard on your health. A lot of people told us like I'm with the Carnegie Housing Project now, when we were doing research, we did a report called This Isn't Working. When we were talking to people who were homeless about why they were homeless, a lot of them said that they started using drugs to cope with being homeless. So that's another reason it's a health issue. So that's an interesting angle on it that you guys are thinking of. That's good thinking.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a good point. On the downtown east side, there's like quite obviously there's quite a bit of like drug use and addiction and stuff. What do you think can like the government do to kind of like help prevent that in the future or for future generations? Because it's usually tied to like trauma and stuff in families, and it can happen a lot with like minorities, like Indigenous people and women, and like what do you think the government can do in the future to like prevent that kind of stuff from happening again?
So great that you're thinking of drug use as being caused by trauma, because that's actually what happens. And out there in the public, there's this discourse that drug use is caused because people are bad people. I know one time I was talking to one person who's a drug user, and she told me that if she couldn't use drugs, she would kill herself. Other people who told me that using drugs helped them focus and be able to maintain a job. So I think what we have to do is the basic public health things. Provide housing for people, provide medical care for people, include in medical care mental health care. Do you know how much it costs to see a counselor for an hour? Raise welfare rates. Welfare is $1,063 a month.
We know that like these issues have been like with us for a while, like the housing crisis and everything, like homelessness. Like why do you think we haven't solved it yet? Like what's the issue? What's so hard about it?
I can remember when we hardly had any homelessness. I used to work at the Downtown East Side Residents Association. You know, we worked at improving conditions in the SROs. We tried to get higher welfare rates. We tried to crack down on people that were over-serving in the beer parlors. We didn't work on homelessness because it didn't exist. Why didn't it exist? Mostly because the federal government was putting a lot of money into social housing. And in those days, low-income people could afford the social housing that the governments were building. Nowadays, most social housing, which is housing that is owned by a government or nonprofit, nowadays most social housing excludes poor people because the rents are too high. Ending homelessness is cheaper than maintaining it, and saving lives, because homelessness makes people die sooner. You'd think that saving money and saving lives would be enough to make the change, but it's not. And so we just have to keep pushing, trying to get people to understand, I guess, and vote for politicians that are going to make the changes we need.
So you were on Vancouver City Council for a couple years, we noticed, and that you voted against a lot of like large building developments in Vancouver. We were just curious of like what's your rationale behind that? Because like typically you would see like big buildings would make like rent cheaper for people and make housing more affordable.
So there's this theory which is called the supply theory, which is that if you create a whole bunch of rental housing, a whole big supply of it, the rents will come down. What we're actually seeing is when you create a lot of expensive housing, that the rents are expensive, even if it's rental housing.
Yeah.
So when I was on council, what I was always trying to do was use my vote to extract affordability from each building.
Yeah, that's a good point. How do you think that the government can kind of like make more social housing? What do you think about how much the government prioritizes it like currently?
There's 3 levels of government, right? The city doesn't have much money to spend on housing because The city can only get money from fees like swimming pool fees or fees on developers and from property taxes, but it can't levy progressive property tax. Like Chip Wilson, who has a $70 million mansion, pays the same rate of property tax as somebody that owns a $500,000 condo. The province has more money. The feds have a lot of money, and the feds and the province can both, they can tax rich people. The province is putting some money into social housing. I don't think they're putting enough in, but the feds are really bad. I just wrote an article in the Georgia Straight, basically trashing the feds because most of the money they spend on housing on social housing excludes low income people. And I think they really need to step up to the plate.
Mm-hmm.
So not too long ago, Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim called for a sweep of the downtown east side, removing over 600 tents and forcing people off the streets and into community homes. So, like, what do you think of Ken Sim's choice, and what do you think should have been done instead to address some of the violence and public safety with people living on the streets?
I don't think that was the right thing to do. It takes about 7 years to build a social housing building. So, I mean, we've got 10,000 people that need new social housing in Vancouver. You know, at the current rate, most of them will be dead before it happens. So you have to have a humane way of treating people who are homeless in the meantime, which means more shelter beds, a humane way to provide housing for people. And that would be, I think, the tiny homes. They can be set up really fast. They can be moved really fast. It's not cheap, but it would save some lives and it would get people off the street.
Yeah. So in order to make like buildings less expensive and how do you think the city could just like overall take the costs of like property and buildings and take them like down? What do you think that the city or like the province can do to kind of like make it more affordable for people?
Well, one thing that different levels of government could do would be to use government-owned property for social housing. Not the downtown east side, but the center of the city in East and West Van and South Van, where they would allow social housing to be built from 6 to 18 stories without a rezoning hearing. That would cut some money off the cost of housing. Another way of cutting cost of housing would be to have modular construction. That's where the housing is built in a factory and shipped to the site. And another advantage of that is it's way faster than building housing on the site. Basically, there has to be more money put into housing.
Yeah. Do you, I'm just curious, do you know where that money is going if they're not spending it on housing? Like, do you know what else they're spending it on instead of that?
Government money? Well, it gets spent on a lot of things. It gets spent on police at the city level, healthcare, education, war.
Would to get the money to be able to put more into housing, would you say they should up taxes, or what do you think would be a good solution to that?
Well, I would cut money from the cops. I would cut money from war.
Yeah.
But basically, I would increase you can't just say I want to increase taxes.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have to say who you want to increase the taxes of. So I would increase taxes on rich people. That we could get billions of dollars by having wealth tax and inheritance tax.
It's a little bit unfair. I totally get that super rich people just get richer and then poor people get even more poor. I was just curious about your views on the decriminalization of drug use and and clean needle stations and stuff on the downtown east side. Do you think that could be helpful for people trying to get out of addiction, or would it make it worse? What do you think?
The drugs on the street are really poison, and people would get a poison drug and then they would pass out, and they'd have to Narcan them and give them oxygen and stuff. And they lost a lot of friends because people died. 6 people a day die in the province, saving these people from having to use poison street drugs. And when I was on council, they asked me if I would come and hand out safe drugs with them one day. So I did. So I think what we need is a safe supply of drugs. There's this guy named Guy Felicella who used to be addicted to drugs, but he now goes around giving speeches about how we need treatment and safe supply. And he had a tweet the other day that said, alcohol companies actually advertise to get people to drink a substance that causes cancer, causes heart disease, causes people to get violent sometimes. Yet, when people use drugs, they get thrown in jail or whatever. And if you use alcohol, it's perfectly okay to advertise about alcohol. So there's a real disconnect there. And if you talk to the people that use drugs, they say what they need is a safe supply. And the other advantage that that would have besides saving lives is it would get the criminals out of the system. Like you wouldn't have gangs going around selling drugs. You'd do it like at a liquor store or something.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
most people who use drugs are not addicted to them.
How so?
There are people like you or me who try it out once in a while. Friend says, oh, let's try this. The coroner, Lisa Lapointe, the former coroner, I think she said there was 225,000 people that use drugs in BC, and only a small portion of them are actually addicted. So if you wanted to go to a doctor and get a prescription for a drug because you had substance use disorder, you wouldn't be able, most people who use drugs wouldn't be able to do it because they don't have substance use disorder. They just do it occasionally, which would be another reason to have a safe supply. Just like with alcohol, there is the argument that when you increase access, you increase problems. So the thing with drugs is you'd regulate it, right? You wouldn't allow advertising. You'd have an age limit. You'd have a quality control so people would know what they were getting.
Wrap up this interview, we wanted to ask you one more question, and it is how do you think young people like us, how can we raise awareness for the homeless crisis, and what can we do to make a difference?
Podcast.
Of course.
Awesome that you're doing that.
Thank you so much.
It's awesome that you're interested. It's really great. So I remember going to the opening of the first food bank in Vancouver. And I remember the people that were running it said, this is only temporary. And now the food banks are saying that they have more people than ever before. Giving help to people is really great. It's really needed. It's awesome if you do it, but it won't end homelessness or poverty. Got to go another step further. And the podcast is good because it's dealing with public opinion, which is necessary to push the politicians in the right direction, right?
Yeah. But thank you so much for giving us your time today. I think we've learned a lot. Thank you so much.
You guys are awesome.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.